Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on From Writer to Tool Builder, AI Coding Agents for Technical Documentation. This is Sheba and I'll be your co-host for tonight. Now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Rebecca Alvis, Senior Technical Writer and AI Innovation Lead at Indeed. So Rebecca specializes in leveraging AI coding agents to build documentation, automation in docs as code environments. With deep expertise in prompt engineering, LLM-powered workflows, and responsible AI governance. Previously, she led Indeed's technical writing function as technical writing manager, guiding teams through organizational change while maintaining strong strategic cross-functional partnerships. Today, she'll explore how to leverage AI coding agents such as Claude and Cursor to build production-ready documentation, automation tools without deep programming, expertise drawing on real-world examples from Indeed's partner platform technical writing team. With that, I'll hand it over to Rebecca. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm honored to be here today. I have been a technical writer at Indeed for 7 years. And I've been working with AI coding agents to build documentation tools for the past year. So as a quick disclaimer, everything I'm sharing today, does come from real projects and actual experience, but I've generalized the examples to make them more broadly applicable to different workflows and tools. This is still a very new area. There is no real established playbook, no certification program, no definitive right or wrong way to approach AI-assisted automation yet. So what I'm sharing today is practical advice that's based on things I've done that have worked for me and some things that haven't. So I'm still learning, and I expect that many of you are probably still learning too and experimenting with these tools as well. So my goal today is to give you concrete examples and strategies that you can adapt to your own context and workflows. During the Q&A, I'd love to hear questions. I'd also love to hear, what's worked for you, what hasn't, any alternative approaches that you've tried, or different perspectives on some of the challenges and solutions that I'm going to discuss today. So, we're all figuring this out together. And I think we learn more by sharing experiences rather than by pretending that there's one, perfect solution. So with that said, let's dive in. If you're working in a Docs as Code environment, you probably see automation opportunities everywhere. Labor-intensive, curation processes, having to track things in spreadsheets, doing very tedious work that doesn't scale across, hundreds or thousands of files. You probably know what should be automated, but, you're a technical writer and not a software engineer. And even if you are a software engineer working as a technical writer, you may not necessarily have the support or the tools immediately at your fingertips to automate the things should be automated. So today I'm going to share, my experience using AI, specifically coding agents, to build my own automation tools. I work primarily with Cursor and Claude, but the strategies and lessons learned apply to any AI coding tool, really. So I'm going to cover 3 main areas today. First, why Docs as Code is the foundation that makes automation possible. Why this, specific way of working enables technical writers to become tool builders. Second, we'll walk through some examples. I have 3 real automation projects that I'm going to present, one on release notes, translation tracking, and quality assessment tool. For each of these, you'll see the problem, the solution, lessons learned, and some key kind of principles and best practices that I learned along the way. Before diving into the examples, I just wanted to cover some prerequisites. On the technical side, it helps if you have a Docs as Code setup with Markdown and Git, or another change management system, access to an AI coding tool. Free tiers work for most, they work fine for getting started with this. But if you do have access, through your employer, to, a variety of coding tools, I would say test them out, take advantage of that. Also, skills Git basics, kind of understanding some basic command line, knowing how to use a text editor to edit files and run commands, like clear communication skills. And it's not required, but it helps if you have some background or some knowledge of Python or JavaScript and working on front-end development. Also, if you have API access to tools to automate with integrations, that really helps a lot too. My setup, so as I mentioned, I primarily use Cursor with Claude Sonnet. Cursor is an AI native IDE designed for extended conversations. So it's based on Visual Studio Code, has a little chat box where you can directly kind of engage with AI, but also have your file open. And, it's good at helping you to edit code kind of as you go and have conversations and iterate like all in the same interface. Together, I would say that this combination feels a lot more like pair programming than just, having like a chat interaction with AI. The collaboration principles that I'm going to share today will work with other AI coding tools as well, as I mentioned. But for these examples, I'm going to be just assuming that you're using Cursor and Claude Code. To understand why AI coding agents are so effective for documentation automation, we're going to look at what makes Docs's code workflows uniquely situated for this. So Docs's code gives you programmatic access to everything. Your content is in text files that scripts can read, modify, and validate. Your workflow is in Git or GitHub or another change management platform where you can test changes safely. And this opens up a lot of automation possibilities that just weren't, accessible otherwise. So if Docs's code offers all these automation possibilities, why haven't technical writers been building these tools already? Like I mentioned, I've only been doing this in the past year or so, but I've been working in a Docs's code environment for much longer than that. So a lot of it can be, having limited programming expertise, not knowing Python or JavaScript, or feeling kind of intimidated by working with actual code. You may also be on a team or in a situation where you don't have dedicated engineering support to build automation for your processes. You may not have developers on your team, a fear of breaking things in production. And so this is definitely something that early on in working in a Docs's code environment, I was very nervous about. And so sometimes that fear can kind of stop you from wanting to innovate. But the good news is that coding agents can really help a lot with, getting through these barriers. And so an AI coding agent can write production-ready code using your natural language descriptions. It can explain code bases in plain English or, your first language, and debug and fix errors iteratively with you, right? And so it can adapt to your feedback. Instead of spending, years learning to code or going and getting a computer science degree, you can learn to collaborate, and you can learn a lot about code by working with AI and getting it to write code for you. What makes this particularly relevant for technical writers is that you're able to leverage skills that you already have. And so technical writers know how to communicate clearly, to explain, requirements, how to think systematically, to break complex topics into steps. You can identify edge cases by asking, what if this happens, and finding gaps in the documentation. And you are likely, used to iterating and refining through review cycles. So these are exactly the skills that AI collaboration, it needs to be effective. One best practice that I want to start with before getting into the examples is always ask for a plan first before generating code. Plans are much faster to discuss and refine than code. It can also help you from getting sucked into this kind of endless hours and hours rabbit hole of interacting with the AI coding agent. And so I always recommend starting with asking it for a plan instead of asking, build me this tool. Instead, let's come up with a plan first. That makes it a lot easier to spot, architectural issues, identify missing requirements, catch completely wrong directions and ideas quickly before you've spent a bunch of time generating code that you need to throw away. Once you've agreed on the plan, refining it and, going through some iterations, then you want to move to asking for implementation. This workflow is incredibly efficient and it plays directly to our strengths as technical writers. We're excellent at reviewing approaches and plans and spotting problems. So the plan phase lets us apply those skills before investing in the implementation. And so I use this pattern with my projects, and it consistently saves me time and produces better results. So now I'm going to show you how this plays out with 3 real automation projects. And the first one is release notes automation. If you're in a Docs as code and publishing release process, you probably are doing something similar to this. And so this is kind of a rough overview of my manual process. It involves reviewing, merge pull requests, looking at the changelog, reading through commit messages typically made by developers and engineers, change descriptions, interpreting those descriptions, categorizing them. Is this a bug fix? Is this a new feature? Is this just an improvement to an already existing feature? That kind of thing. And then, compiling your draft, formatting it for publication, getting review, and then, in my case, adding more context and links. And so, for internal release notes, that might look like adding links to Jira tickets or internal knowledge base, other resources, or for an external doc site, that might be, linking to other documentation within the site so that your audience can see what has changed and kind of quickly go to those docs. This can be a very labor-intensive process. There's a lot of effort in interpreting, what's going on, kind of curating it. It's easy to miss important changes, especially if they aren't well documented from whoever pushed them. And you can also get, if you're working on a team, inconsistent categorization, or writers may be interpreting things differently. And so you can have inconsistencies across release notes. It's also very repetitive, structured work, which can make it kind of tedious for a human, but is actually what makes it well suited for automation. Another best practice before I jump into, the architecture of what I built would be writing down your manual process. Most likely you already have this written. In my case, I both wrote and kind of created the process. And so I understood it probably better than anybody else at the company. It was my process. And so I knew I had it all written down just step by step at a very granular level what happens. That really helps with automation because the automation ends up replicating your workflow. And this can really reduce, the effort, right, that it takes to curate and kind of make sure everything is standard and maintain the quality of the release notes. So this is kind of a rough diagram of what my automation ended up looking like. And so first, it's a Python scripts it's a collection of Python scripts and API calls and prompts that sort of replicate each of the steps in the process. And so there's a script that queries GitHub, or GitLab or your change management system by date to kind of gather all of the changes. You have prompts, or I built prompts that filter the content and, allows the AI to categorize things by type and generate a markdown draft that includes already formatted links to extra context. And so essentially I've automated, compiling that draft, going through, interpreting, categorizing, compiling the draft, and then it sends it to me. And all I need to do is just, validate it, add context, make some tweaks and some copy edits, and then it's ready to be published. So, some key lessons that I learned from going through this process, basically writing down your manual workflow helps a lot before you actually start automating. the AI is drafting, but you still need that human in the loop to review for accuracy. And, when I first did this, I created kind of a general draft and noticed, the categorization logic wasn't working very well. And there were some things that, it was getting wrong. I didn't like how the formatting looked. And so, iterating on the prompts with AI and having it, okay, like, all headings need to be in sentence case. Here's some more specific, requirements for what counts as a feature change or what counts as a bug, that kind of thing. And so iterating on prompts was really helpful. Starting simple. So instead of just saying, automate my release notes process, start with the first step. And so I started with, okay, how do we automate the process of gathering all the requirement or gathering all of the changes and interpreting them? So going kind of one step at a time. Okay, and so I'm going to move on to another tool I built, and this is kind of one aspect of it that I'm going to focus on. So for a translation sync automation, basically this is useful in a scenario where you have docs that are published in multiple languages, but the source language is constantly being updated, right? And so you have a dynamic docs. You have to keep track of what's already been translated, what's outdated, what's missing. This can become really challenging if you have a large, content base. The, kind of checking and seeing like what's in sync manually can involve like checking, timestamps in change logs, opening up your corresponding translation file and just like looking and seeing, and particularly if you don't understand the language that it's translated into, just kind of spot checking it and, seeing, okay, is there a file that exists for this? When was the last time that was updated? Does it match with the source language? And, repeating this for every file, tracking this kind of manually one thing at a time in a spreadsheet. These are all processes that can be very time consuming and tedious, and that also lend themselves really well to automation. And so the architecture for the automation that we came up with for this basically looks at the repo with the source language files, and there's a Python script that scans all of the source files and then checks them and compares the timestamps on those with the translations. It also can identify gaps, right? If there's missing translation files, and generate a dashboard and some mechanism for alerting the team when something, needs to be updated. This is an example of a type of dashboard that can be generated pretty easily. And so essentially what the script and the AI do is, kind of systematically go through and create like a manifest or a report with all of the information. And you can ask it, okay, I want to build a dashboard for this. This is what like an HTML dashboard might look like that gives you visibility into the status and stats. You could also work on an integration to build a dashboard that lives in your knowledge base in something like Confluence, for example, where it's more evergreen and, visible to a larger amount of people. So dashboards are really useful and can provide, visibility. So beyond just you being able to go and pull up all of this information, you need a way to share it, and to share it in such a way that it makes sense to other members of your team and also like leadership and other stakeholders. You want to be able to, separate these concerns from the actual translation. And so, like I said, I'm kind of focusing more on just tracking. Using AI to translate is also something that can be very useful and that I've worked on, but is kind of out of the scope for this talk. Simple timestamp logic is reliable. File structures, timestamps, these are things that AI is really good at, making sense of. Translation prompts, like I mentioned, kind of out of scope for this talk, but they need, a lot of like iteration and standards, kind of just throwing some text at AI and saying, okay, translate this into whatever language, you're not going to get, maybe the most compliant or consistent results. So that's why I also recommend asking AI to help you write prompts. And so it's okay if you don't, you most likely are very skilled at writing documentation, writing processes and procedures, but, writing prompts may still be new. And so ask the AI to help you write it. It knows, or what information it needs, right? What information do you need in order to build a translation sync tool? And it can tell you, and you can kind of go back and forth and clarify ideas. And it also helps you to learn prompt engineering. Okay, so the final example that I'm going to go through is a quality assessment. So you may have been in this scenario where you have, a lot of pages and you want to audit them and review them for individual quality. This can be difficult, especially if you're working as like a sole tech writer, or you have a small team and you have a pretty big set of content, of pages that need to be assessed. And so, applying this can involve kind of coming up with some criteria or just applying subjective judgment. I know I've definitely gone through and just sort of eyeballed the pages and been like, okay, I don't know, looks good. This one looks like it needs help. Don't really know why, but, we kind of have those sort of instincts, but there's a lot of, inconsistency that can come with that. And keeping track and trying to remember what you evaluated previously. There's so many times too where I might get an internal stakeholder kind of asking, why was this exact change made? What happened? And it's from like 2 years ago. And I don't know. I have to go and dig through comments and figure things out. And so, trying to just kind of remember this on your own is hard. And also, even if you do have a systematic way of tracking it manually, it can be also very time consuming. You can run into, inconsistent scoring, especially if you're working like with a team of different writers, or if you're working by yourself, you may have blind spots that you're just not aware of in how you're assessing the quality of documentation. This doesn't really scale when you have hundreds and hundreds of pages. And, it's difficult if you don't have tracking metrics to go by, because then it's just sort of a gut feeling, right? Like, I think the documentation's in good shape, or I think it needs work. It's very kind of subjective and fuzzy, and when you're going through page after page after page, after a while, it's repetitive, and, it can be kind of mentally taxing work to do. This kind of thing, automating this can be really helpful when you need something more systematic and you need to be able to quantify, what your quality, like the state of quality looks like for your documentation. So this is an example of the type of rubric that you might come up with. And I kind of start here. So I have a background with teaching in higher education. And the way that I approach quality assessment for documentation is the same way that I approach, writing an assignment for student paper and then coming up with a rubric for how I'll grade it. When you're grading student papers, you don't want to just give, a number or just say like this was good or this was bad. You want to be able to have, very specific criteria that students are aware of beforehand, that you can then refer back to in justifying and explaining, why they're receiving the grade that they did, and be able to give, actionable feedback and how to improve their score. And so when I approached this automation project, I thought of it like, okay, I'm the professor and I'm teaching my TA, and so this would be the AI coding agent, how to grade a student paper and create a rubric. And so we kind of went back and forth together where we built a rubric, and then I gave it some, sample documentation to grade and told it, okay, grade this and, give me feedback, tell me why, et cetera. And then, iterated on that until we came up with kind of built out a larger process. And so what that larger process looked like, roughly was like this. So first, there's a Python script that would crawl a doc site and scrape the content from pages. And like I said, we already had a custom rubric in place. And so, the script knows to do this. And then the next scrape the content, next step is, how to prompt and a script that would systematically go through each page, one page at a time. And the AI would apply the rubric and assess it and generate a report. So the AI would also then assign a score from 0 to 100. It would have to cite kind of specific examples from the page and justify why it did what it did, and then provide, actionable feedback. I also added an integration that would automatically generate a dashboard in Confluence and create tickets for every page that scored below a certain threshold. So, you can say every page that got below a 60 or a 70 out of 100, automatically generate a ticket for that so that we can later go and make those improvements manually. So what I found most helpful from this was really starting with rubrics and then kind of going and building out a step-by-step process for automation. I also found that building not just one rubric, which I did at first, and applying it to everything, but actually having custom rubrics and some sort of logic that the AI can use to categorize and kind of identify which page needs to be assessed with which rubric. So at first I had a general rubric and I noticed it was giving landing pages really low scores because they didn't have code samples. And it's well, code sample doesn't belong on a landing page. And so I came up with, another rubric that's specifically for landing pages, and so on. Requiring the AI to cite evidence, really helpful, helps keep things consistent and standard and understand why it's grading things the way that it is. Providing actionable feedback, that's really helpful for generating those JIRA tickets and kind of assigning this out to different writers. Using the teaching approach and kind of thinking of this, the AI not as, okay, here, you're, this machine that's coding for me, but instead, you're my TA, you're my teaching assistant, and you're helping me, assess the quality. I found very helpful. Dashboard visibility. So actually being able to have metrics that you can share with leadership, that you can show kind of tracking a change over time and improvement, really helpful. So a final best practice that I'll share from this is making AI show its work. So, instead of just having some sort of telling it, okay, how good is the writing on this page or rate this, actually making it go through and explain its reasoning helps you to catch hallucinations. And it's also what helps to create actionable feedback that then you can use as a writer and consistently and systematically make improvements. Okay, so to kind of wrap things up, I'm just going to go over some key, principles and lessons, to help with getting started on your first documentation automation projects. And this is kind of a rehash of things I've already gone through, what has worked for me, planning first, asking the AI to help with prompting or help refine prompts, or even say, here's my prompt. How can we make it better, more understandable for AI, providing clear context. And so having those manual processes really well documented and just kind of providing that to the AI, iterating in small steps. Like I said, instead of just throwing a massive project at it all at once, using some sort of, version control like Git or GitHub that can help, reduce the risk and allow you to test. Asking why, asking the AI to explain its decisions, to explain code to you, very helpful. And again, to treat this as pair programming, to treat this as like a relationship or a conversation rather than, I'm just sort of dictating this and expecting the AI to just magically build things for me. What doesn't work, just jumping immediately into code or just taking the first thing that it comes up with and going with it. Providing vague requests, again, having things written really helps. Assuming that the AI knows all of your context. Just sort of blindly copying and pasting code that it provides, it really helps to make sure that you understand why it's doing what it's doing so that you can find problems and fix them, trying to do everything at once. Also, a lot of times with the AI agents, if you try to do too much at once, it'll start taking shortcuts and kind of be eager to say, okay, great, what a great idea. Everything's done. It's ready for production. Before it's actually, ready for production. And that can also come up if you're not testing and you're just sort of taking it face value. Okay, it says it's done, just kind of moving directly into production. Okay, so for choosing your first project, I recommend, looking for something that is tedious, where it may be boring, maybe there's just a lot of like pain and frustration, but also something that's low risk, something that involves a lot of repetition, that's rules-based, where you have clear patterns. Some examples, changelog generation, something like the release notes generation, a broken link checking or link formatting, file organization, format conversion. I recently went through, I had a big directory full of screenshots that were the files were all named in just completely inconsistent, confusing ways. And I had it go through and just systematically rename all of the files and decide on, a pattern that would make the most sense. So these are really good places to start. You have lots of tooling options.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that's a wrap for today's session. So thanks a lot to you for walking us through the topic. I hope the insights shared today gave everyone a clearer understanding of how Docs as code workflows combined with AI coding agents can enable technical writers to design, build, and sustain production-ready automation, reducing manual effort, improving quality, and expanding team impact without requiring deep engineering expertise. To everyone who tuned in, thank you for taking your time to be here and for all your great questions and comments. And of course, if you have more questions or want to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be back soon with another session. Until then, see you next time. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everyone for joining today.